So here we begin activation phase 1. So this will kind of be the second fifth of the turn, or I guess sixth if we call final activations. It's almost sixth, I suppose. But this is the first of 4 activation phases. So 1 and 3 are very similar, but not identical. 2 and 4 are very similar, and I think not identical. So we're just going to go through the flip book here, and we're going to start with Russia or China acts. And when we go over to the flip book, we're going to find that if this is activation phase 1, I roll a d10 and I determine which country acts using the results below, and then the other country acts the next time either Russia or China acts. So let's roll it up and see. We got a 4. That means that Russia acts. So we're going to consult the Russia action chart, WPR1, in the World Peer Acts booklet, and we'll see what that does. All right, so this is World Peer Russia Acts WPR. So we go to WPR step 1 here. And this whole thing is reasonably complicated. So the first thing we do is we check if Russia has a victory and the player, which would be me, automatically loses. So that happens if Russia has a base in Eastern Europe, a total of 9 or more Russia influence counters are on the map, and either Eurozone stability is 5 or less, or is, I should say, less than 5, or either NATO or the UK have ally relations with the US worse than very close. So let's check these conditions. Obviously, it would be very weird if Russia were to meet its victory conditions at the start of the scenario. But going through these criteria in order, we see that Russia, in fact, does not have a base in Eastern Europe. There are four, I believe, total Russia influence markers. And if we look at the Eurozone, both the UK and NATO are, in fact, very close to us. So Russia meets none of these 3 conditions. And I guess part of that is Eurozone stability. Eurozone stability is currently at 6, so that is okay too. So of the 3 conditions, one of which is a 2-parter, Russia doesn't meet any of them. So that looks okay right now. So the next thing we do is determine if Russia's posture changes. And the first thing we do there is flip all the tension counters that are on Russia, total their values, and then resolve the first condition that applies. So we go over to Russia. Russia doesn't have any tension counters. So the total then, we are currently at posture 2. So we'll go down to this criteria, and the sum of the flipped tension counters is 0 to 1. Now China's got a ton of tension markers because of that whole hacking thing that they did before the game started. So if currently at posture 2 and the sum of the flipped tension counters is 0 to 1, which is what I take to be the case, and relations with the US is 4 or 5, decrease posture to posture 1. So relations with the U.S. is in fact 4. So we are actually going to we're going to move Russia down to posture 1. Now, I guess I'm not sure. We get these extra counters. So Russia and China will get extra actions when they're at posture 2. And I assume that that comes out of the cup now, because it actually was in the cup. For the one for Russia was in the cup at the start of this scenario. So let's check on that. Okay, so the extra action for Russia does stay in the cup, as said in the governing manual. This was actually super duper easy to find, until it is drawn. And then it comes out if the posture is still at 1 at that time. Now, we do have to do the part 2 here. Based on the sum of the tensions values above, Russia's relationship with the U.S. may be changed. So we'll place a trending U.S. Trending pro, because the sum of the counters is 0, we will place a trending pro-U.S. counter on the relations with the U.S. track. And if there was like a bunch of tension, then we would see anti-U.S. tension. So we'll grab a trending pro-U.S. here. These counter trays are designed to be used with, and we'll put this up. Oh, we're actually trending anti-U.S. Okay, so what happens then is if it's trending anti-U.S., this comes off, and we don't get a marker at all. So now it is just 2, which is bad, but it is stable-ish at 2. These are one of those 2-step tracks. So next we're going to attempt to improve Russia's strategic capabilities. They will make 2 rolls, or 3 if currently at posture 2. And we're going to use this hierarchy to determine which areas until we've completed all the allowed attempts. First of all is areas in which Russia trails the U.S. by 2 or more boxes. And then if we have 2 or more left, we attempt to increase both cyber warfare and strategic missile defense. And then for remaining actions, we just roll a d10. So let's take a look at strategic capabilities. Let me know what the video quality is like here. I realize we're on jerky cam because I'm doing this off the phone. So Russia is definitely behind 2 in strategic recon or intel gathering. They are not behind, in some cases, not behind at all anywhere else. And nowhere else are they behind greater than 2. So we're definitely going to roll on strategic recon / intel gathering. So back over to the dice tower here. I haven't actually used the d6 that came with the game yet. So we're going to roll, and because they are at posture 1, they will increase on a result of 1 to 4. It would be 1 to 5 if they were still at posture 2, but they are not. So they have an 8, so they do not increase. Now they do have 1 left. Step 2 here, if we have 2 or more actions left, attempt to increase both cyber warfare and strategic missile defense. So we do choose randomly between those 2. So even will be cyber warfare, odd will be strategic defense. Odd, so it is strategic missiles and defense. And once again, we're going to roll, and on a 1 to 4, it will increase. It is a 6, so it does not increase. And it's good for Mr. President. And I guess now would be a great time to observe that I'm glad that I'm rolling just as badly for Russia as I did for myself. Now, one other thing that I did was I took all the pools that were in cups and I put them in this tray. This is one of my 3D printed counter trays. I'm going to have to print one more because I had to make adjustments with utility and I have to get this one to work. But U.S. military footprints in one compartment, unilateral and multilateral sanctions are in one, UN goodwill and UN sanctions are in the other, and all the tensions markers are in the last one. And it all fits real nice. If I had to do this again, I would probably divide these up a little bit differently, but thus far, I would say that this particular tray is working just fine. Okay, so next up is step D, which is espionage. After attempting to improve Russia's strategic capabilities, then we do espionage. Now, if Russia's relations with the U.S. is 1 or 2, it is a 2, and posture is 2, and it is only a 1. They make 2 espionage attempts to steal from the U.S. and its allies. Otherwise, they only make 1. So for each one, we're going to apply DRMs, and we're going to roll a D10. What are the DRMs? Looks like DRMs are okay. So we get a -1 or a -2 if cyber warfare strategic capability is 1 or 2 or more higher than the U.S.'s cyber warfare capability, and it is. That's a little fuzzy, I think. There is a flat, how I take this is it's a flat ±3 cap on total DRMs. So I think we get a -1 for Russia's cyber warfare strategic capability being 1 higher than the U.S.'s. -2 if any U.S. ally relationship is currently estranged. That does not appear to be the case. -1 if the U.S. ally relationship with any ally except India and or the Gulf states / Saudi Arabia is not very close. Now, India is just close. Gulf state Saudi Arabia is just close. So I think these boxes in the various places on the regional map, if you will, correspond to either allies or adversaries. Now here we have Canada, they're very close. Over here we have, in the Eurozone, we have the UK and NATO, we're very close. There's nobody in Eastern Europe. Central America, there's nobody. In the Middle East, there is Israel, with whom we are very close. And I take Iran to not be an ally, although I didn't see like a iconographic way to tell. Central or South Asia, India, again, we're just close. Africa, there is no ally. And Asia Pacific, we are very close with Japan, Australia, and interestingly, what do we got here? This is Republic of Korea, and that's very close as well. So it doesn't look like that applies. +1 or +2 if the U.S. cyber warfare capability is 1 or 2 higher, and it isn't. +2 if there's a +2 DRM the next espionage, and there isn't. And there's also a +2 DRM remainder of game counter for Russia, and there isn't. So it sounds like we only get a -1 on this roll. So let's roll it up and see what we get. So we get an 8, -1 is a 7. So the result there is 4 to 7 with a 7, steal military secrets / war plans. If possible, increase the strength of a U.S. opponent by 2 in any current war, or U.S. allies opponent if no eligible U.S. opponent. Otherwise, increase Russia / NATO's relative strength by 1 box in Russia's favor on the conflict track. Okay, so if we go over to wars, there is a war going on. And that is the war in Afghanistan against the Taliban, which I think we can consider a U.S. opponent. So we're going to increase strength by 2. So what I think that means is we remove this 6. That'll go back in the tray. And we will take out an 8 and make it an 8. So our good friends in Russia are feeding info and intel to the Taliban is what that smells like to me. And I think it's U.S. opponent because it's the U.S. at war here and then, against whoever. And in this case, it's the Taliban. So their strength increases by 2. Now, how that even works, that's a great question, and I don't even know, and we'll get to that in a later phase. All right, so next up is step E, attempt to improve the Russian economy, which we don't do. If the Russian state of the economy is already 7, it is not, it is 4. So we will roll a d10. There is a multilateral sanctions counter on Russia, and that gives us a +3 to the DRM. -1 per Russia influence counter in the Eurozone, and there is one. Eastern Europe, and there is one, and or Central South America. There isn't one in Central South America. -1 if Russia's relations with the U.S. is 5, and it most assuredly is not. That 5 would be great. We're getting along great. It is a 2. So I'm smelling then +3 for the multilateral sanctions, and then -1 for the Russian influence counters in the Eurozone and Eastern Europe. So we get a net +1 on this roll. So let's see what we get. We get a 4. That turns into a 5. That makes no change. So the Russian state of the economy is a 4, so it's not great. They are in, it's not recession, it is stagnation. What could we do to affect that? We could probably get rid of the Russian influence. That would help. And we may be able to place unilateral sanctions as well. So we'll see if we can, that's something we can do later. Now we're going to calculate the number of actual actions Russia is going to take in step F. Now, they receive a number of actions equal to the current value on their SOE track +1. That current value, as we saw before, is 4. So that's what they get. +1 would be a 5. And then this is modified by the value at the bottom of their relations with the U.S. track. And if we go and look at that, we can see that they're very motivated because they're mad at us. So they get a +1. So that is 6 actions. And then we got to backtrack. If we rolled a 9+ on our earlier attempt to improve the economy, and maybe there should be a marker for that because I didn't, but if I, had forgotten or taken a break or something like that, I just might not remember. There are also no -1 or +1 AP counters are currently on Russia. So that looks like we've got the dependent actions to do, and we're going to have 6 of them. And as the game suggests, we're going to keep track of that on this D6 here, which I haven't found a different use for yet. All right, so I think how this works is we basically go down the list, do the things that qualify, and until we run out of things to do. And there's a whole bunch more actions after the dependent actions. So the first item here, then going down the list, is terror in Central or South Asia. If there are at least 5 total terror group levels, combination of values on all the terror groups in the Central South Asia region, use 1 Russia action to remove 1 terror level from the largest group. This represents Russia dealing with internal dissent among ethnic, political, and religious opposition in the stands. Okay, so we go to Central and South Asia, and there are actually only 3 levels of terror groups in there, so that does not apply. Next up is quell rising internal dissent. Roll a d10, adding 1 if Russia posture is 2, which it is not. Okay, so let's roll a d10. Almost all the rolls appear to be d10 rolls. Okay, so we got number 3. So we're going to use 1 Russia action to allocate the human and financial capital needed to address political, social, and infrastructure costs. Okay, so what that looks like is it's just sucking away an action from Russia. That doesn't appear to actually make any difference. Next is reinforcements. If Russia is at war, it is not. Next up after that is possible Syrian intervention. If you are a new player or it is year 1 of the game, skip this action. Okay, so I guess we'll skip that action. I'm willing to not be considered a new player, even though I am a new player, but it is year 1 of the game, so we're going to skip that. So I take this statement to mean that if it is year 1 of the game, so I'm skipping this entire action, so all of this stuff, and we're going directly to number 5. So next up then is new conflict in Eastern Europe. There is a file of errata and clarifications available on GMT's website, which I actually need to print and will be probably printed before the end of this episode. If there's a rogue state of any level in either region that is not already at war with anyone, so this is Eastern Europe or Central or South Asia. So Eastern Europe, do we have a rogue state in? I don't think so. I think the rogue states are Iran and North Korea pretty much. Central or South Asia, how do we tell if there's a rogue state? Okay, so how we tell if there's a rogue state is if there's a rogue state marker, and that's not it, but there is a rogue state marker that might show up if there's a rogue state there. There is an unstable state in Central or South Asia, but no rogue state. So I think this one does not apply either. Okay, so we're going to go on to step H. This is remaining action hierarchy. 10 possible actions to take in order to use any remaining Russia actions, which there are 5 left. Cyber campaigns to disrupt, cyber attacks and online disinformation campaigns to disrupt, weaken, confuse, and delay. Make 2 attacks using the chart to the right if at posture 1, or 3 attacks at posture 2. And if you're performing this as part of a Russia Acts crisis chit activation, which this is not, this is their regular thing. For each attack, roll a d10, then another d10 to resolve the attacks on the chart to the right, which I believe to be this chart. All right, so we determined the target. So we're going to do 2 of these. So let's roll a d10 to determine the target. That is an 8. So the target is to target U.S. relationship with European allies. Success decreases the NATO ally relationship by 1 level, if possible, otherwise decrease the UK ally relationship. So major success decreases both NATO and UK ally relationships by 1 level. And that's one of the Russia victory conditions, so that would be super duper bad. All right, so we're going to roll here on this table using this thing, and I don't see any DRMs, but there are rows for this. So the DR, if Russia's cyber strategic capability is greater than U.S. cyber strategic capability, which it is. So we're going to roll and see what we get. That's a D10 roll. This could be super bad. That's a 2, so that's a major success. So what that means is that decreases both the NATO and UK ally relationships by 1 level. So that's super bad, actually. So they have managed to... We're not really estranged. We're still close, but we're not very close anymore. That's pretty bad. And we're going to get another one of these rolls. So we're not liking what the Russians are up to. That one's a 4. So this is going to be to discredit the U.S. president. So interestingly, this says success uses 1 AP and decrease public approval by 1. But the rest of them don't say that. But the whole thing says 1 action. So I think right now we are at 4 Russian actions, and we're about to be at 3 Russian actions. So does this mean it uses an additional AP? It might. Yeah, I think it does. Okay, so that's fine. So we're same roll as before, actually, because they have the leg up on us in this cyber strategic capabilities. So if they succeed, they use 1 AP and decrease public approval by 1, and major success uses 2 APs if available, and decreases relations with Congress by 1 box and public approval by 2 boxes. Okay, so these toxic people. All right, 7 is actually just a success. So we are going to decrease public approval by 1 box. So it'll take us down over there, and that's going to I believe, and I'll check this in the clarifications, I think that's going to cost us another action, so we're down to 2. Okay, so here's the official FAQ slash errata, and the actual errata in here is pretty minimal. There's 4 bullet points of errata, and the rest is just clarifications. However, this particular question is not in here, and it does seem like that costing 3. I mean, that's pretty damaging. So it feels like that's pretty damaging. So maybe that's correct, but I'm a little wishy-washy on whether my interpretation is correct. So we spent an action to do the cyber attacks, okay, and then we spent another action for the success, which takes us down to 2 remaining Russia actions. So we move to the next page, which is action number 2. Initiate multi-domain, low-intensity gray zone attacks to expand Russia's influence in neighboring regions. Okay, if any regions have 3 or more, so I believe we do these steps in this order. If any regions have 3 or more Russia influence counters, which is not the case. Next is expand Russian influence. Attempt to expand Russian influence of Eastern Europe if there are 0 or 1 Russia influence counters and no base in Eastern Europe, and that is correct. Or there's 2 Russia influence counters and no base, and 3 plus Russia influence counters in the Eurozone. So there is 1 Russia influence in Eastern Europe. So I think we will attempt to do this. So we're going to roll a D10 and add the selected region's U.S. regional alignment. U.S. regional alignment is a 6. Okay, so let's roll it up. See what we get. So 6 plus 6 is 12. So on a result of 10 or less, place 1 Russia influence counter in the selected region, which is not the case. Any other result has no effect, but does count as Russia's action for action number 2. Okay, so we have now only 1 Russia action left. So we'll go to action number 3, compromise to facilitate removal of sanctions. Okay, and there are sanctions on Russia. So if Russia's relations with the U.S. is currently 4 or 5, which it is not, remove all sanctions. Boom. If sanctions are currently on Russia, roll a D10 and apply the DRMs below. Okay, so Russia is not currently at posture 2. Russia's strategic missiles and missile defense capability is 2+ boxes higher than the U.S. That is not the case. If Russia is on the Russia +2 box in the relative strength on the Russia-NATO conflict track, which if we go over here, Russia-NATO is only 1 box away from that, but it is not at that, so that DRM does not apply either. +1 if Eastern Europe's stability is 6 or higher. It is currently a 5. +1 if Eurozone stability is 7 or higher, which it is currently a 6. And Eastern Europe stability is 6 or higher, which is also not the case. +1 if U.S. strategic missiles defense capability is 1+ boxes higher than Russia, which it is not, or if NATO is on the NATO +1 or +2 box in relative strength, which it is not the case. +1 if this is the last Russia action available, and it is. Russian leaders realize that sanctions are impeding other desired actions, so they attempt to compromise to end them. Okay. So I'm not really feeling like that explanation of that DRM makes sense, because that is actually going to make it harder for Russia. +2 if there's multilateral sanctions marker on Russia, which there is. So I believe that unless the gist of that is to say that, hey, Russia might get pinched out of an action here because of the sanctions. So we have a total DRM of +3 here. So let's see what we get. We get a 9 + 3 is a 12. So what happens is the West stands firm and Russia blinks. If Russian posture is currently 2, decrease it to 1. If it is already 1, decrease the status on the Russia-NATO conflict track by 1 box and remove all sanctions. If that track is already at 1, then remove 2 Russia influence counters anywhere on the map your choice and remove the sanctions. So they did get the sanctions removed, which is interesting. Okay, so there's 2 markers on these. Well, there's really 2 tracks here on this Russia-NATO thing. There's the status, which is like how close they are to going to war. And going to war is bad. I believe that causes us to lose the game. And the relative strength. So the status is currently at 2, and it's going to go to 1. And then that is going to remove the multilateral sanctions marker from Russia. So it's probably not a terrible idea to get that put back on, right? We'll see if that works. There are also unilateral sanctions, but that does not appear to have as many or as large an effect. So now, having gone through the rather involved Russia Acts sequence, we are now done with it. We've done steps A through H, and we're ready to move on to the next step in the turn record track. Now, we did, per the instructions in the game, we did put Russia acted over here so that we know over here that it'll be China that acts. Now we're going to go up here and we get to take 3 actions. And this is a slightly more restricted set of actions than is possible over here because we don't get the cabinet member bonus actions. However, we do get an extra AP for each action that we didn't take here. So let's look at the actions, and these are the actions off the Master Actions cards, of which there are 4, as you've seen already. So let's take a look at those and decide what we're going to do. All right, so we are on the take any 3 actions step of activation phase 1. So we get 3 actions here. We do not get the extra actions for key cabinet members, but if we don't spend 3, then we can get an action point back. But I think we're actually going to spend 3 here, and let's see what we're going to do. All right, so we're going to assign the Secretary of State to attempt to improve one region's alignment. And this does cost 1 action, so we will move action points. So we're now at 10 action points. Okay. And then we make a regional alignment check, and that is a track check. And we're going to send them to the Middle East, and regional alignment right now is 5. Now, we do get a DRM on this roll of +1 for our Secretary of State's diplomatic rating, and or -1, and a +1 if Russia or China has influence in the region, and Russia does have 1. So this is going to be a net no DRM roll. So the way this regional alignment check works is we look at the regional alignment track and look at its number. There's regional alignment. It is a 5 in the Middle East. If we pass, so we need a 5 or less because there's no DRMs net at the end of the day. This is a case in which if we roll an unmodified 10, which I, of course, will predict right now that I will, in fact, roll, then we place a trending anti-U.S. counter on the regional alignment track. Now, this is one of those 2-step tracks. So if we get so that is not a success, but it is not a natural 10 either. So there is actually a pro-U.S. trending marker over there right now. So if we had passed, we would actually remove that and move it up 1, which would have been great. And if we had gotten the terrible result to give us an anti-U.S. trending, we would actually pull that off and it would just be at 5. So it would be really useful for that to be at 6 or even 7, and we have failed to do that. So the Secretary of State has at least a +1, so that's good. But in order for us to get that Russia influence out of there, we need that to be at least 6, and probably 7 would be better. So we need to get that alignment up. So this is probably something we're going to continue to keep doing until it works. Next, we're going to send the Defense Secretary for 1 action point. We're going to direct them to gather intel across 2 different terror groups. And the terror groups in question are the 2 terror groups in the Middle East that we're gathering intel on. So this is a D10, -1 if there were U.S. intel or advisors in the region, and there is, and -1 if there's focused national intelligence in the region, and there is. So this is kind of hard to do without any additional assets, in that we need a 1 to 4, but we do get a -2. So we're looking for 6 or better. So for the top counter, we have rolled a net 2. So we will move this terror group up to locating. So we've got a line on them. And for the other one, 3. So that's a net 1. So we will move them up as well. Now, the president will actually do an action as well. So we'll move that down. So we're at 8 action points left right now. That kind of worries me a little bit, in that we might not have enough action points left. So we'll see how that shakes out. This by itself might end up losing me the game. But the president is going to go on a trip to the Middle East. We can do this during any activation segment, which this is, during which diplomatic action may be taken, which this is, and may only be used once per activation segment. So we can't do this again in activation segment 1. So we're going to choose a region on the world map. That's going to be the Middle East. We're going to make a presidential prestige check. Presidential prestige is currently at 6, as we can see here. So that's the number that we're going to roll against. So if I pass, I get trending pro-US, and the same thing applies. There is one there already, so it would actually move alignment up 1. If I roll a 10, and that's a natural 10 because there are no DRMs to this particular check, then it goes trending anti-US. So this is step 1, so let's roll the dice and see what we get. 3. Okay, so that's less than the 6 that we have, so that does actually succeed. So what that looks like is we pull pro-US trending off. Shadows are still a problem, but it's not quite as bad. And we move regional alignment up by 1, which is in net a very good thing. And what I believe that's representing is kind of the fact that regional governments in this area are increasingly aligned with what the U.S. would like and would like out of them. Stability, however, is still pretty low. So we are going to do step 2 here, which is if the region's stability is 3 or 4, it is a 4, or there is currently a war in the region. There is not. And that's a function in this case of the difficulty, because if you start on the hard difficulty, there's actually a war here, the Syrian civil war. But in the normal difficulty, the only war that is happening at the beginning of the game is the war against the Taliban. So we roll a d10 again to determine appreciation for our efforts. And we've rolled a 5. And what that means is we get a +2 public approval, which is great. So our public approval goes up to 42. That's fantastic. And this can eventually, this LP is legacy points, which are kind of victory points as far as I can tell. But we'll see how those actually play out. I don't think they have necessarily a direct impact on the game while you're playing, but they absolutely do have an impact on how things shake out when time comes to determine whether you won or not. And legacy points, again, based on the difficulty level that we picked, start at 5. So with that complete, we will move down 1 on the track, and we are going to draw 1 crisis chit. Okay, so we have crisis chits in a cup. This will be the first time we're doing this particular mechanism, and it is, I don't know if you can see that on camera or not. I'm not facing toward it. This is kind of a key mechanism in the game. Okay, so this one says draw crisis cards 2. So we're going to draw 2 crisis cards from the crisis cards deck. And we'll put this one face down for now. We do them in order. So this is a regular event, immediate. You may choose to spend 2 APs each on Canada and Mexico aimed at improving and rebalancing NAFTA. Consequences of your decision. If you spend them on Canada, improve relations with Canada by 1 level or place an economy improving on the US SOE track. Relations with Canada are as high as they're going to be right now, but that's still economy improving on the economy track sounds like a good idea. If you choose not to spend the 2 APs, it decrease your relations with the Canada ally by 1 level, which we don't want. Mexico, if we spend the 2 APs, we place a trending pro-US counter on Central America. If we don't, +1 regional crisis in Central America. And the actions are controversial regardless of the choice. All right, so if we're looking at the card, we can actually spend on both. And I feel like we have to, actually, because if we don't, there are negative effects. However, we only have 8 points, and this will take us down to 4. So I think we're going to have to do that. So we will put an economy improving on the state of the U.S. economy here, which sounds good. We will spend the hideously expensive 4 APs. Now, what this probably means is in the next action phase, we're not going to get to take an action. And then if we spend the 2 APs on Mexico, which we are, we're going to get a trending pro-US counter on Central America, which I think is probably good. And the basis of this was, we're going to be up to crisis 3 if we don't do that. Now, Trending pro-US. Does that go on alignment? Does that go on stability? I think it goes on alignment. In any event, because our actions are controversial, we roll a d10. 7. This is going to be a -2 public approval. So that -2 counteracts our -1 and then some. And the basis of this event is new NAFTA negotiations bring opportunity/controversy. I think it's really important to read the that very short headline descriptive text on these cards, because otherwise it may end up feeling, the whole game may end up feeling bland. The other event is new automation technologies create huge increase in Chinese factory production. So we place an economy improving marker on the China SOE track and a +1 AP marker on China. We place 1 China influence in Asia Pacific and 1 more China influence in a random region. If China's U.S. relationship is 3 or higher, and it is, place an economy improving marker on the U.S. SOE track and a trending pro-U.S. counter on China's U.S. relationship, because we're linked economies. Okay, so we place, first of all, 1 China influence marker in Asia Pacific, and that's going to move the China influence track up 1. And we place 1 more China influence in a random region, and that's a D10 roll, and that's a 0. So 0, that's a 10. So that's going to be, see that 10 right there? That means Asia Pacific. So they're going to get another influence in Asia Pacific. So they are deepening their ties with the countries in that region, which is probably not great. And their influence is going to go up 1 more to 6. And Chinese win the game if they get to 15, by the way. China's relationship with the U.S. is 3 or higher. It is currently at a 4. So we're going to place an economy improving marker on the U.S. State of the Economy track. Now, U.S. State of the Economy is already improving, so it's actually going to come off, and it's going to go up 1. And that's 2 U.S. economic assistance. I have no idea what that means yet. We actually get a +1 AP, which I'm not sure that I took into account when we determined that, but it's a little late now. Next, we place a trending pro-U.S. counter on China's U.S. relationship. So they're trending pro-U.S. too. And I'm cool with that. For, China's our buddy right now. So the Russians are making us mad. Next question then is, what do we do with these cards? And that's actually shown on here. So you can see that this one goes into pile D. Let's see if you can actually see that. That's the discard pile. Some cards will go into the reshuffle pile, and some will go into like an escalation pile. Those are for cascading events. So both of these will go to the discard pile, which in my case, I'm putting just behind these right there. These deck boxes are spares. They're designed for American-sized cards. These are Euro-sized cards, so they don't quite fit, but for our purposes here today, it totally is fine. Okay, so per the instructions, there is a plus sign on this card. So we have gotten a +1. We're going to actually move this down again, and we're going to draw another crisis card from the Crisis Cup. I'm trying not to spend too much time futzing with the camera, so I apologize for shaky cam. Ooh, +2 plus cascading event. Let's see what that does. All right, so what this means is that there is a cascading event deck 2, which we do have cards in, and these are the issues that were like left over from the previous administration. So we shuffle these, and I will shuffle them off camera, and draw 1 at random, and then I'll show you what we do. All right, there's only 2 of the things, so shuffle is, questionable as far as what that does, but I believe that that's more or less randomized. All right, so what we do here is we do step 2 on the card. So if U.S. cyber warfare is greater than or equal to China cyber warfare, it is not. Same as from the crisis decks above. Otherwise, U.S. targeted, make a homeland security check. So that's going to take us over to the homeland security check, where our rating is currently 6. So if we pass, there's a minor disruption. Place 2 tensions marker on China. Place a worsening economy counter on both China and on the U.S. SOE track. And we decrease public approval by 1 box. Fail is a major disruption, which would be bad. Adding a correction here, we did put a economy improving marker on the China State of the Economy based on the crisis card, the first crisis card that we drew. So I think a question that I could ask here, and I didn't find this at a cursory glance, is we make it a Homeland Security check. Does my Secretary of Defense or anybody else, does their rating affect that role? Now, our Secretary of Defense is unqualified to be the Secretary of Defense. So it's kind of academic for this particular role. But I would like to know, my impression at the current moment is that it does not affect that. So this is potentially pretty bad. So let's see what we get. The number is a 6. We want that or better. So we got a 4. So that is a pass, and we do have a minor disruption. So we're going to place 2 tensions counters on China. Let's do that. We'll pick 2 random tensions counters out of the tray, and they'll go on China. And there's a lot of tension markers on China. I place a worsening economy counter on both China and the U.S. So over here, I'm kind of lucky that I got the economy up when I did, because now it's worsening. And over here at China, they had an economy improving, but that's going to go away. So neither actual economy changes state from that effect. We decrease public approval by 1 box. So public approval is looking at 36% right now. We're a deeply unpopular president, but that's because we pooped our pants on stage previously. So that's what is really at fault. All right, so and then this one goes into, it's going to take us to 2. It's coming from 2, and it's going to the 3 pile. So this will go to the 3 deck, and then that other card will go to the 2 deck. And I guess I should put those face down from now on. Now, once again, we're moving U.S. current action down 1, and because that had a plus on it, we're drawing yet another of the dreaded crisis chits. So let's see what happens. And this is the last one that it's possible. So in this case, we're actually drawing, once again, 2 crisis cards. And we're going to resolve them in the order in which they were drawn. And we'll put that chit over here. And then next up, we'll go to the next step after these crisis cards are resolved. So the first one, Secretary of State offends host on overseas trip. Great. Roll a d10 to identify a random region, then roll a d10 again and subtract the Secretary of State's diplomatic rating to get a final result. All right. So we'll roll a d10 to determine the region, and that is a 3. 3 is Central America. So the Secretary of State has thrown up on the Nicaraguan ambassador or something like that. Now we roll a d10. Secretary of State's diplomatic rating is a 1. So we're going to subtract that. And that makes me more confident in the previous result, right? Because I think the card should have told me if I was going to subtract the military rating, and we did not. So let's roll and see what we get. We got a 2. The result is a 1. So that turns into, it's a minor faux pas that is quickly forgotten. So I guess he just like dry heaved on the Nicaraguan ambassador. No game effect. So we got off pretty lucky on that. And then if we look in the corner, this one goes into the reshuffle pile, which will go here. That will eventually get reshuffled at some point. I think so. All right, so that could have been a lot worse. So the second event is increasing pirate attacks target energy supply lines through the Straits of Malacca. +1 to regional crisis, and add 1 level 1 and 1 level 2 terror group in Asia Pacific. Okay, that's great. All right, so regional crisis level will go up to 2. Zooming over here, we're going to grab 2 terror groups, and we're going to add a level 2 and a level 1 terror group. So we're going to have to get that figured out. And we place tension counters on China, Japan, ROK, Australia, and India. So let's grab 4 tension markers. And there's a huge pile of tension markers. I'm keeping these face down for now. On China already because of that cyber attack. So place a tensions marker on China. They get another one. Place a tensions marker on Japan. That'll go here. 1 on ROK. That's 2 for them. I mean, it's a tense place, right? 1 on Australia. And then 1 more actually goes on India. And they have a pretty big, healthy stack of tension markers there as well. Okay, now, I may immediately spend 2 APs to send the U.S. Navy to enhance security in the Straits of Malacca. If we choose not to roll the D100, we either get +1 regional crisis in Asia Pacific, which would increase that to 3, which would be bad. Or we place a trend, or we roll a die, and we might place a trending anti-US counter in Asia Pacific. Nevertheless, we only have 4 APs left. That's not cool. So I think we're going to have to decline to send the Navy, and we're going to have to make that roll. So let's see what that turns out to be. I don't know that either result is particularly good here. So we're going to get a trending anti-US, and I think we're just putting that there. I think. Does that go on alignment, or which is what I think that's where its effect happens, but I'm not sure. Now, of course, we already got the Navy there. I don't know why the Navy can't do something, but that's not what the card says. So, oh well. So Asia Pacific's flaring up right now in a big way, and it's not looking great. Middle East is a mess, but boy, this is kind of looking like a big mess as well. All right, so after referencing the governing manual, I do think that this trending anti-US actually goes on the region's alignment, because stability can just fluctuate up and down, but the sort of two-step tracks are called the trending tracks, and those are the ones where you get a trending marker before you could actually move the marker. So I believe I'm doing that correctly. Again, I'd be happy to accept a correction in the comments. And then this card, which, I guess could have gone worse, will go into the reshuffle pile as well. So we'll put that over there. Now we are, thank goodness, done with friggin' crisis cards. So even though there's a plus on that, we top that out at 3. So we move up to 1 rogue group acts. So we'll take a look at the flip book and see how that one works. I will make an observation here that all the materials are actually really good at giving you references. They're not necessarily page numbers. They're usually section numbers or table numbers. But everything seems really well designed to direct you to the right place in the correct book. And there's a lot of books, so it would be kind of a fiasco if this wasn't the case. But the materials, especially the flip book, but also the Master Action cards are really doing a good job of telling you exactly where to go for the explanation of what it is you're trying to do. And although the index on the back of the governing manual does not look great, I have nevertheless found what I was looking for using it in my couple of times having to go through the governing manual to figure out what to do. So, or for a clarification. So kudos on that so far. I'll have more to say about that in the wrap video that I do at the end of this playthrough. So in the meantime, we're going to draw one of the 4 allied chits to determine which group of allies and or rogues activates. So we're going to draw one of the 4. Those are these things. So we'll draw, are these numbered? Well, we'll draw this one. So group A is the group that will activate. And then per the instructions in the flip book, we will put this up here, and we'll presumably shuffle those again for the following turn. So the flip book is directing us to the WA, or Ally and Rogue States book. And we are in Group A, which is the EU, NATO, the Republic of Korea, and Iran. So these allies act only in their region except for NATO, which can affect the Eurozone or Eastern Europe. So when it is this ally group's turn to act, we perform a European Union procedure to update economic trends and changes. So we roll a D10 for World Economic Trend. That's super duper interesting because we can get economy improving everywhere, not just here, or worse economy elsewhere. So I guess we roll a D10 on this. I don't see a DRM of any kind. So we get a 1. Okay, so growing economies. We place an economy improving marker on all 4 SOE tracks. So that means that Russia gets 1, China gets 1. In the Eurozone, the worsening economy marker comes off. And over here in the U.S., the worsening economy comes off. So world economic trends are lifting all boats. All right, so number 2, we roll a D10 for the Eurozone. There is a -1 or -2 DRM if the Eurozone stability is 6 or 7. I feel like that's could be clearer, but I certainly interpret that as, hey, the Eurozone's economy stability is a 6, so we get a +1. +2 DRM if it's 5 less than 5, but it is a 6. All right, so we roll a D on that. We'll see what happens. That's a 5. So that's going to reduce down to a 4. Economic Summit strengthens Eurozone, placing economy improving counter on the Eurozone's SOE track. If it's already at 7, then increase Eurozone stability by 1 box instead. So we're going back to the state of the economy, and we just took off a worsening economy. We're now going to put on an improving economy. So good for the Eurozone. All right, next we're going to do step 2. We're going to activate NATO. We note the ally relationship. It is currently close, thanks to that bit of fuckery by China or Russia or whoever that was. It is close, so we get 1 joint action. We can perform a number of joint actions determined by the ally relationship and then adjusted by +1 or -1 AP markers on NATO, which there aren't any of. The possible joint actions you can choose are listed below under possible joint actions. And then when you finish it, flip over all tensions counters on NATO, which there aren't any, to reveal their values. So let's do the joint actions. So possible joint actions. And they can only act in the Eurozone or Eastern Europe. So we can locate a terror group in the region, place that group on the gather intel. That's rather powerful, considering I have to roll to do that. We can reinforce if the allies involved in a war, which they are not. They can de-escalate. They can attempt to decrease the status track away from war by 1 level, and that's not allowed if estranged. Request UN humanitarian aid in any region, which is interesting. And that can potentially decrease the regional crisis track in that region. We can remove stress by removing up to 2 tensions from this ally. Okay, so what we're going to try and do here is request UN humanitarian aid in any region. And we will pick the Middle East because that is at crisis level 3 at this time. I'll also point out that no other region is at crisis level 3. So we're going to roll a d10 on that. We have rolled a 9, so we have no effect. So that's bad. Now, after that, when we're finished with the joint actions, any tension markers get flipped over, but NATO doesn't have any tension markers. Then we make a d10 unilateral action die roll. And this is just a d10 roll. Now, -1 if no tension markers are on NATO, which is correct. +1 for tension values, plus the current conflict status value on the Russia-NATO conflict track. So Russia-NATO is at status 1. So we are getting a +1 on that. And there is a current war, including U.S. forces. That's versus the Taliban in Afghanistan. So we're getting a -1, but a +2. So a net +1 on this die roll. And the die roll is a 7. So that's an adjusted 6. Counter terror, decrease 1 level 3, 2, or 1 terror group in the Eurozone or Eastern Europe by 1 level. So in the Eurozone, there are no terror groups. In Eastern Europe, there is 1, and that will just go away. So he will go back into the terror group holding area. So that's good. And I think there's only 1 of those. So then we apply results, then we remove all the NATO's flipped and replace it with half the number of counters that we removed. So that doesn't actually happen. So next we're going to activate the Republic of Korea. Okay, so now we're going to activate the ROK, which is exactly the same procedure as over here in number 2, except that we're going to use this unilateral action table. So the first thing we're going to do then, once again, is we're going to perform a number of joint actions that's determined by ally relationship. Now, with the ROK, we are very close, so we're going to get 2 joint actions. So going over to possible joint actions. So I think the first thing we're going to do is do an auto success on a terror group in the region. And we automatically place that group on the gather intel box, or if they're already in that box, you move them up to the next box on the track. And it does say NATO gets 2 intel successes, but this is the ROK and not NATO. So moving over here, we'll take one of these level 2 terror groups and put it on gathering intel. And then for our second joint action, we will request UN humanitarian aid to try and get that regional crisis level down. So we will roll a d10, and that is a 10. So that is a result that has no effect. So that was a flop. Next, we will make a d10 on the unilateral action roll. which is a 3. So back over on unilateral action. Family visits decrease DPRK/ROK conflict track status by 1 box. Actually, I thought that I was going to actually end up doing that on the previous joint action, so I'm glad I didn't, because now it's going to go down for free. Now, I missed a step here, so we might have to take that back. So when finished with joint actions, flip over all tensions markers on NATO to reveal their values. So we're going to do that with the Republic of Korea instead. And you can see that they have a 2. So that is actually going to sum of tensions counters as a possible DRM. So let's check that on this table. So +1 per tensions value. We do have 2 tensions value and then a +1 for every 2 tensions counters on North Korea. We only have 1 on North Korea, and then plus half the conflict status value on that track, and we round up. So that is actually, we actually started that at 2, so we're actually going to add 1 for that as well. So that means our total DRM here is 2 for the +2 for the tensions on ROK. We don't get the 1 for Korea, but we get another +1. So that turns our roll of 3 actually into a 6. So this is going to be increase regional trade. Let's first of all make sure we moved the DPRK/ROK tensions box up to, or conflict box, up to where it is supposed to be. And we will remove 1 China or Russia influence from Asia Pac. If none, place a trending pro-US counter in Asia Pacific. So the Chinese have a crap ton of influence here, so we'll be happy to take one of those away just from that. So that is also a pretty good result for us, the US. All right, and then we take these tensions counters off, and we replace them with half of the tensions counters face down. So this will gradually trickle down for the most part. And then I believe we just put these back in the tensions pile, and I'll shuffle it up a little bit. All right, so next, I think we're going to do the Iran action. But after NATO and ROK activations, activate Iran. So the first thing we do is flip over any tensions counters and sanctions counters on Iran. All right, so we do have a tensions marker, and that is worth a 1. Roll a d10 and refer to Iran's action chart. Apply the results, and then remove all tensions marker and replace with 1/2 that number rounded down. Okay, so the net for tensions is +1. +2 if Israel is currently at war with Hezbollah or Hamas, it is not. +1 if the Middle East regional alignment is currently 6 or higher, it is actually 6. So we get a +1. And +3 if Iran is at war with Israel. So we have a +2 to this roll. And this could be a big war breaking out here. This could be some nasty stuff. Woo-hoo-hoo. Okay, so that's an 11. Strengthen Hezbollah. Move the Israel/neighbors relative strength track 1 box in favor of the neighbors on the conflict track. So that's over here on the conflict track. And we're going to move this 1 in the direction of neighbors. So the neighbors, the neighboring hostile states to Israel, are strengthening. So we check unstable states to finish this segment. And that's this right here. So we roll a d10 once for each unstable state counter in Central and South America. Why Central America and South America? That seems weird. Okay, so it's Central America and South America because we're activating Group A. So let's have a look here. We do have an unstable state in Central America and an unstable state in South America. So for each, we'll roll a d10. So for the one unstable state in Central America, we have a 1. So we will actually remove that unstable state from Central America. So that is actually in better shape than it was. Now for the one in South America, we also rolled a 1. So we remove that. Let's make sure we're not getting DRMs here. Regional stability in Central America is less than 5, so we are going to get a +1 to that, but that would raise it to a 2 for Central America. South America stability is a 5, so less than 5 would not apply. So unstable states in both cases will come off. So South America and Central America are stabilizing, which is good. So we won't have any civil war or any other unpleasantness break out, at least not yet. Okay, before we get to this, we actually do the first step there. That's the lower half of that box, which is POTUS cabinet focus. So let's go to the flip book and figure that out. So I got to get used to that. A number of these boxes have like a top half and a bottom half that you do in order. It's not just like one thing per box. And presumably that's just to keep this thing a little more manageable. There's already a lot of steps on this turn sequence track. All right, so now we're going to do the POTUS / cabinet focus. So let's zoom over here. Now we have prioritized these 6 items in priority order, and the chits will actually tell us what the success range is, and then something happens if we get a success. Now, if there are any tension markers on any of these, then we don't roll for that slot because they've gotten deprioritized in the wake of other stuff that we have to deal with. But there are no tension markers on those, so we're actually going to get to roll. Let's zoom out just a little bit. So let's roll for number, and we go in lowest to highest, or I should say, lowest to highest priority. So we start with 6 and end with 1. So for cabinet effectiveness, this is actually a D6 roll, not a D10 roll. First time I've actually rolled a D6. All right, so for cabinet effectiveness, which is priority number 6, we needed a 1, we did not get a 1. For address domestic crises, we need a 1 or a 2. That's number 5, we don't get that. Number 4, priority number 4 is public and press relations. We succeed on this on 1 to 3. We failed that one too. Okay, priority number 3 is improve relations with Congress. We again succeed on 1 to 3. Okay, this is going real well. Priority number 2 is the economy. Succeed on 1 to 4. Okay, so that actually goes. I'm just going to cock this for now, and we'll look at what the results are in a second. And then Homeland Security, success 1 to 5. And that's a 6, of course, so we failed that. So the only one of the 6 that we succeeded on was the economy. So looking at this up here, we do place because we succeeded, we place an improving economy counter on the U.S. SOE track. Now, the SOE track is actually at its maximum value, but I think I can still put this on there. It's just not going to move up because it can't move up. There's no higher slots, but that will ablate a economy worsening chit if that should show up at a later time. So step 2 here is anytime the game instructs you to place tension markers on that focus track, you place those number of tokens to the right of each focus area, and you go in lowest to highest priority order. So you start with number 6, then number 5, then number 4, and so on. If all 6 tensions boxes have counters in them, then instead of placing more tensions, you get a -1 AP, which, boy, we couldn't afford right now. And we were on the cabinet drama table instead. Domestic max extraction number 6 allows you to remove tension markers, so that's good to know for the future. So none of that applies. Next up is scandal tensions. We don't have any scandals out at this moment. So this is just, the game will tell us when to put a scandal out, I believe. All right, so now we move the counter forward 1 space on the turn sequence track. And that actually moves us down here to domestic actions. So now we will proceed with the domestic actions sequence. So back to the flip book, we're going to perform this step. First thing we're going to do is decrease media relations. Now that comes over here, and we're kind of in the middle of the road here already, so we're going to decrease it from 5 to 4. And this just goes down every time we perform this particular step. Next, we're going to perform 2 domestic actions. Now, this does cost action points, but we only have 4 action points left, and we are in the hole because we have like 3/5 of a turn left after this. So we're only going to perform 1. This is another phase in which we can get credit back for not performing an action, for deferring that action. So we could forego 1 or more allowed actions to recover 1 action point. So we're going to perform 1 action, which is going to be improve relations with Congress. Domestically, I think we're in pretty good shape, but that's maybe because we haven't done any domestic things that can get screwed up yet. So we're going to perform that action, which is going to cost us one action point, but then we're not going to perform the second possible action, so that's going to go back up to 4. We need at this point to get some more action points. Now, you don't save action points from turn to turn, so if they don't get used, they don't get used. But if we look at the turn sequence, there's like a huge pile of opportunities to perform actions over here, and we have hardly any points left. And as we've seen, the cards can cost points. So to improve relations with Congress, we can do this in any activation segment, but we can only do it once per activation segment, so once during this part of the turn. It costs 1 action, and you can pay extra to get a DRM. If your party controls both houses of Congress, we do not. That was in this scenario setup. You can choose to forego a die roll and resolve a +1 to relations with Congress track, but that does cost an action, but not an AP. Interesting. Interesting that those are different. Hope I didn't screw anything up in the meantime. Anyway, otherwise, roll a d6. So once again, we're rolling a d6. Okay, so let's see what we get. Ooh, we get a 1. Okay, so that is the maximum. Well, let's check DRMs first. -1 if relations with Congress is the #1 POTUS cabinet focus. It is not. Homeland Security is. -1 if I have the respected by Congress POTUS attribute. I do not. -1 if I spend an extra AP. +1 if current RWC track is 4 or 5, +2 if RWC is 2 or 3. Relations with Congress is currently 5, so we actually do get a +1 DRM on this roll. So our adjusted total is 2, which does mean that it goes up 1 to collegial. So that sounds like it would be good. We'll see what... Like I said, we haven't done any domestic stuff yet, really at all, but I think that's just an accident of how the turn structure works. So we'll see how that actually works. We're actually going to start doing some domestic stuff right now. Now we're going to perform legislative segment. So step 1, determine support or opposition to pending bills. If there are no pending bills, skip this step. According to the setup, unless I missed it, there were no pending bills. Number 2 is attempt to pass pending bills. If no pending bills, skip this step. So we skip that. Number 3, sign or veto bills. If no bills are passed, skip this step. Number 4 is add legislative friends or opponents. If we pass and sign a landmark bill only, add a new congressional friend. If it was your bill and your party relations, allow a new friend or opponent. And party relations determine your maximum number of friends in Congress. So we didn't pass a bill, so I think we're not doing any of this. So we go to number 5, how the sausage is made. Roll 1d6 and refer to the Congressional Maneuvering and Drama table, d6 in the Domestic Charts booklet. So let's roll the die. d6, not a d10. Okay, we got a 2, so let's look at that table. So here in the Domestic Charts book, Book D, is the Congressional Maneuvering and Drama table. So there are a bunch of DRMs. Now we rolled a 2. We'll see what happens to that. So -1 if bipartisan cooperation is in the rightmost box. We will see that it is not. That would have to be at its maximum for that to be the case. +1 if bipartisan cooperation is in either of the 2 leftmost boxes, which it is. -1 if RWC is currently 7 or greater. As we just saw, it is a 6. +2 if it is 3 or less, so no. -1 if public approval is greater than 60%. +2 if public approval is less than 30%. It is currently 36%. -1 if friends outnumber opponents in Congress. We see that congressional friends and congressional opponents are equal. +2 if this is the second roll of the step due to bipartisan cooperation. So that is not the case. So the only DRM we have here is that +1, which means that our 2 goes to a 3. So referring back to the table here, we have a congressional agenda. Add a new bill matching the highest public priority that isn't already in the pending bills area to the 0 box as opponent's legislation. If the bill is one of your administration's 3 priorities plus 2 APs. If all public priority bills are already in the pending bills area, move 1 opponent's legislation left 1 box. Okay, so public legislation priority, the highest one is education reform. So these are the bills that nothing is happening yet. These bills have not yet been introduced. Education reform. Okay, so we move that to the 0 box on pending bills on its opponent's side. Now, our administration legislative priorities, 1, 2, and 3, the campaign promise apparently does not apply here, is education reform. So we will actually get, because of that, +2 action points, which is great. So it's one of the things it's hard to tell before you actually walk through this turn is what kind of opportunities do you have to gain action points as opposed to spending action points to do stuff. So that has happened a couple of times now. So is there anything else to do here? If all public priority bills are already in the pending bills, so that is not the case. All right, so the next step is introduce new bills. Remove all bills currently in the cannot be passed box, which there aren't any, and place them in the unused bills. You may now voluntarily remove any of your, not your opponent's, bills currently in any box of the pending bills section. Because you can never have more than 5 bills in the pending bills section, you'll sometimes want to remove a bill or two that are lower priority to make room for new higher priority bills. The number in the current box in the bipartisan cooperation section is the number of bills that are now introduced. If you control both houses of Congress, you choose which bills to introduce. If your opponent controls both houses, choose opponent's legislation for the bills that are the highest public priorities. If control is split, roll a d6 to see who gets to choose the first bill to introduce. Even is me, odd is the opponent's party. Then alternate between parties until we've made the indicated number of attempts. So the number in the current bipartisan cooperation box is 1. It is split, so we're going to have to actually roll to see who gets to introduce the bill. That is a 4, and that's me. Okay, so our other administration legislative priority is infrastructure upgrades. So let's go for that. Where's is that? That's a pretty high public priority as well. So infrastructure upgrades. All right, so where do we put it? So we place the bills that either we or our opponents have introduced in the 0 box if there is split control in Congress, which there is. Place the bills or the bill or bills in the -1 box introduced by a party controlling both houses of Congress and the +1 box for a party that has neither house of Congress. So I think this goes in the 0. Place a newly introduced bill in the 0 box. Okay, so here's our bill. And there's the opponent's bill. Ours is infrastructure upgrades. Theirs is education reform. But both of those are pretty high public priorities and administration priorities. So as far as I'm concerned, they should both get pushed along if possible. So next we determine the media results. Total, then compare the media ratings of all friends and opponents. I'll show you that in a minute. Then move public approval, that number of boxes, with a max of 3 boxes in your favor if friends net is higher. If the result is the max, also adjust media relations by 1 box higher. Okay, so we have Tom Isao with media 2 and Julia Chen with media 2. And on the other, so that's 4 points. And on the other side, we have Court Wilson as media 1. So we are at the maximum of +3. So we will actually move this up 3 tracks to 42. So that's pretty good. And because it was at the maximum, our media relations will actually go up 1 as well. And that takes that to 5. Next up is scandal investigations. There are currently no scandals. I assume that these come out via event cards. Next, we adjust bipartisan cooperation. Examine all friends and opponents. If there are more moderates than radicals, move cooperation right. If there are more radicals than moderates, move cooperation left. So this is going to be bad. So we have 3 radicals, and 1 moderate. So we're actually going to move bipartisan cooperation left to contentious. So next is legislative momentum. Perform 1 immediate free action of any type for each of your bills that were passed and signed during the activation segment. So none of that actually occurs. And we need to also get an immediate free action if you confirmed a Supreme Court justice or passed a Greater Society bill this activation segment. So we didn't do any of that. So we will move the counter forward 1 step, and we are back to the dreaded crisis chits. This is where you're going to need to pretend that there's an appropriate high-tension sound effect. So this is the one I got my eye on here. Oh, it's Russia Acts 2. Okay, so I think this is just 1 action, but we'll actually see. Let's put that here. Let's actually see how that works. It says 2, but what I think that means is that it is an extra action for Russia because when we built the cup, they were at posture 2, which gives them that extra action.
Per the flip book, this is a special crisis chit. So we go to the Russia action chart, WPR1, which we'll look at in a second. And we perform 2 actions only. First one is cyber attacks, and then we roll a d10 to select another random action from the 1 to 10 list of remaining actions. And if we roll cyber again, we re-roll.
So that is going to be over here in the Russia book. And true to actual current events, Russia's being a giant pain in the ass. So we'll do cyber attacks. The first thing we're going to do is to determine the target. And this does, the action is 2 attacks. So we'll determine the target. That's a D10 roll. And the target is 8, which is U.S. relationship with European allies, which is actually what we got before. Success decreases the NATO ally relationship by 1 level. And that is unfortunately possible, and that means that we are now estranged with NATO. We're going to definitely have to work on that. That's a big problem. And we know that that's the result for 8 because DR, if this is the die roll, if Russia's cyber strategic capability is greater than US, and it is. So 4 to 9 is the success range. So next we do... we'll roll a d10 to determine what the other action is. That's a 6. So that's going to be over here. Veto UN sanctions. If there is currently a UN sanctions counter on Iran or North Korea, Russia vetoes the renewal of sanctions at the UN. All right. There's no sanctions on Iran. There are UN sanctions on North Korea. So we remove it. If this doesn't apply and this was a random roll, result, roll again. Okay, so the sanctions come off of North Korea, and we will put those back into the UN sanctions pool, which we will mix up a little bit. And because this is there's no plus on this token, and I think even anyway, I can't draw multiple chits in this particular step. There's a bunch of places where you can draw up to 3 chits. I think that doesn't come back. Okay, so now current U.S. action will go back down to focused national intelligence. So we're going to perform this focused national intelligence step. If we have the exceptional White House resources card superstars on the NSC staff, which we do not, you may use this card to perform 1 free intel or SOF or raid action. So step 1 here is only applicable if we have the exceptional White House resources card superstars on the NSC staff, which we do not. So we're going to go to number 2, roll on the focused national intel collection table, which is this thing. For each region that has an FNI counter, that is only the Middle East, to determine the effects of my focused intel in that region, you may move the counter as you wish. Okay, there are DRMs to this. -1 if strategic recon intel gathering is higher than both Russia and China's. It is not. -1 if cyber warfare is higher than both China and Russia's. I'm actually wrong. Cyber warfare is less than Russia and China's, but strategic recon and intel gathering is higher. So we get a -1 on this roll. -1 if either Russia or China has an influence counter in the region, and their cyber is greater than that of the U.S. It is greater, and Russia does have an influence counter. So that is a -1 +1 for a net 0. So we're going to roll the die and see what happens. 5. All right. Effects on terrorism. Move a level 3, 2, 1 in that priority terror group in the region to the locating box. So we already have locating. Can we just move it? Right from like nothing. So we'll take the next highest group and move it to the locating box. And then we'll take another one, which is actually the last one there, and move it to gathering intel. So that's interesting because I'm seeing that a number of the actions are things that will potentially at least occur on their own during the course of the turn. So that what that probably means is that I blew too many action points, I think is what that means. All right, effects on war. If a U.S. or U.S. ally is involved in a war in the region, and we're not, the war against the Taliban is in Central South Asia. So none of that applies. If there is a civil war in the region, and there is, you may choose to share intel with the UN in order to get them to intervene. Make an immediate broker peace talks roll in the UN for the chosen civil war. There is a civil war marker here. That is the Syrian civil war. So we look at WM4 in the World Charts booklet. And there is an overall DRM -2. All right, World Charts Booklet, WM. So we're looking at WM4. Civil War Resolution Broker Peace Chart. Okay, so we get a DRM -2 for that, according to this thing. Okay, overall DRM. So does that mean none of the rest of these apply? -1 if it's a UN action, which I guess it's not. -2 if there's a UN regional peacekeepers counter under the Civil War ceasefire counter. There isn't. +1 if regional stability is less than 5, and it is. So +1 if there's an Iranian influence beneath the Civil War ceasefire counters, which there isn't. Okay. So when it says overall DRM of -2, let me see if there's something in the errata about that. All right. So that's really awkward phrasing, and there's nothing in the clarifications about it. So I am going to say that for this particular type of role on the Civil War in the region, that that is the overall final DRM. So we will roll at a -2. So let's roll and see what we get. That's an 8, which is not great. That's a 6. Fighting continues. So it's Civil War, so fighting continues. So nothing actually happens there. So that's nice. And we can so we would actually get to roll on this table for each region in which we have focused national intelligence. But because we're behind in cyber, we only get 1. And we chose to put that in the Middle East. So we will now move down to any 4 diplomatic and or military actions. So we've got 6 APs. That is not a lot to work with, but let's see how that actually works. So in going through the master action cards, I'm actually pretty convinced now that I have been spending action points incorrectly. So you have actions, which you have a limit of in terms of number of actions you can perform, and you have APs, action points. So this, for example, which I was considering doing, is 1 action and 1 AP, but this one over here is just 1 action, and we've done this a couple of times. So I'm pretty sure I should have more than this 6 action points. Without going through the video, which I'm not going to slow the game down to do, I think I'm just going to make a manual adjustment of moving it up to 8, because I know that I've done this twice, and that doesn't appear to cost APs. So I will actually pay closer attention to that from now on. In any event, we are actually going to do this again, because we have terror groups in the locating box up in the Middle East, and we would like to scout them out. So we are we've got 3 terror groups of level 2. So select 2 terror groups. It'll be the top 2 level 2s. DRMs include, there is focused national intelligence, there is U.S. intel or advisors in the region. So we will be at -2. So for the top one is an 8. So that is a failure. And for the bottom one, that is a 5. -2 is a 3. So we will move 1 up to targeting. So we know where they are, and we're going to get them. This one looks good. Encourage bipartisanship in Congress. And again, we're going to send the chief of staff out to do this. So we roll a d6. DRMs are -1, and so that doesn't apply. Moderate influence, POTUS attribute. So let's see what we get. We can damage our relations with our own party here. That's a 4, which is no effect. So that was a bust. And that did cost an AP. Now, the president is going to use the bully pulpit to rally support for or against a bill in Congress. And we are going to pick infrastructure upgrades because that's our bill. And it's, we want our bill to pass rather than the other people's bill, right? But I'd like them both to pass, but ours is the one we're going after. So we identify the target bill in Congress, and we declare 4, and we roll a d6. So modifiers here. -1 if public approval is 60% or greater. It is not. -1 if we have orator or media savvy, which we do not. -1 if bipartisan cooperation is in the cooperative box. It is not. Public approval is not 30% or less. Relations with Congress is 4 or less. Relations with Congress is actually 6 right now. But bipartisan cooperation is in the contentious box. So that looks like this is a total net +1. And there's like a special optional rule where you could give yourself a free DRM, but we're not doing that. That's cheating. All right, so net DRM of -1. Let's see what we get. 6. Ooh. So that's a 5. The bill remains in its current box on the pending bills track. It's actually a +1, so it's a 7, but that's the same result. And we did use 3 actions instead of 4, so we're actually going to gain 1 action point for the action that we did not perform. And that is the end of activation phase 1, which means it is the end of this video. So I am especially curious as to what folks think of this video. The format, the shaky cam is probably going to be irritating. I apologize for that, but if it's really bothering you, please do let me know in the comments. If I have messed anything else up, and I'm pretty sure I undercompensated for the action point thing, but I'm not going to go back and count them either. So we're just gonna wing. I gave myself the 2 points back that I know I had spent. But otherwise, we're just gonna live with it and say I had less action points. And for that matter, I am reasonably sure that I left off a couple action points for the state of the economy at the time, which would have been at 6 when we started the game. That's an extra action point. Maybe I counted that, maybe I didn't. I'm not sure. In any event, please do point out any errors in the comments below. That is much appreciated. I'd like to fully understand the game. I will do an episode for each of activation phases 2, 3, and 4, and then we'll do a much shorter episode for final activations, and then we will call it a completed series, and I will put together a final video with my thoughts on the game so far. It will not be a review. I will not have spent enough time on it as of that moment to consider it a review, but I will be able to give you at least an informed opinion about it. And right now, my informed opinion, to the extent that it is informed at this moment, having played through 1 activation phase, is pretty positive, but not unqualifiedly positive. Certainly, in terms of presentation and approachability for a game this complicated, and this is pretty complicated, the presentation of a game this complicated is really knocking it out of the ballpark. This is literally, I punched the chips out and did what the book said and buzzed through that how to play book and started going through the flip book, and I have occasionally needed to look stuff up in the governing manual, but otherwise everything has been more or less clear, other than those things that I felt were a little less than clear that I've pointed out as we go through this, and I don't know that any of those were incredibly major things. So it's looking good so far. We're going to continue to play through this first year of the Mr. President's presidency and see how it goes. So thanks for watching. If you have enjoyed this or are enjoying this, please do thumbs up the video. Please do subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to help support the channel, it is much appreciated. It would be simply not possible to continue to do the kind of stuff that we do here at Ardwulf's Lair, experimental or not, without the help and support and encouragement of the patrons. So thank you, patrons. If you'd like to consider becoming a patron, there is a link to that, as well as several other ways to help the channel in the video description. So if you check that out, I would appreciate it. Until next time, thanks for watching and happy presidenting.